In the spring of 1943, as Allied forces prepared to invade the soft underbelly of Europe, a quiet war was already being fought far from the beaches of Sicily. Behind enemy lines in northern Italy, small bands of American operatives from the newly formed Office of Strategic Services, precursor to the CIA, were being trained for missions so secret that even their commanding officers in London were told little more than a name and a destination. One such mission was codenamed Operation Chrysler. The assignment sounded simple on paper: infiltrate Axis-held Italy, sabotage key German supply routes, and establish contact with local resistance groups. But buried in the operation's final page, marked only Eyes Only, was an additional instruction: investigate the disappearance of a British intelligence officer, Captain Robert Ellison, who had gone missing 6 months earlier while operating near Lake Garda. No remains, no radio contact, no confirmed death. His last transmission, intercepted by both sides, had ended with a single cryptic phrase: "The Falcon flies." Lieutenant John Mace, a former Harvard historian turned OSS field officer, led the four-man team selected for Chrysler. Trained in demolitions, espionage, and Italian dialects at the OSS camp in Catoctin Mountain, Maryland, Mace and his men were specialists in the art of vanishing. Alongside him were Sergeant Thomas Keegan, a demolitions expert from Boston, Corporal Frank Willits, a radio operator from Kansas, and an Italian-American interpreter, Enzo Ricci, who'd fled Mussolini's regime in 1938. Together, they were told they would be inserted behind German lines to coordinate sabotage operations with the local partisans of Lombardy. On the night of May 11, 1943, under a moonless sky, their C-47 aircraft took off from an Allied airfield in Tunisia. The men sat in silence as the engines droned over the Mediterranean, their parachutes strapped tight. Somewhere below, beyond the blackness, stretched the Italian Alps in a maze of German positions. As the jump light turned green, Mace gave the signal, shouting over the wind, "For Chrysler, see you on the ground." Within seconds, they disappeared into the darkness. The drop zone, a remote valley near Brescia, was obscured by heavy fog. Their landing was chaotic, gear containers scattered, one parachute tangled in a tree, and Keegan wrenched his knee on the rocky slope. Worse still, their radio transmitter was lost in the drop. With daylight approaching, they buried their parachutes and moved toward the foothills, where, according to intelligence briefings, sympathetic villagers might offer shelter. That first day behind enemy lines tested both their courage and trust. German patrols from the 16th SS Panzergrenadier Division roamed the roads, and fascist informants were known to betray Allied agents for a few thousand lire. By nightfall, exhausted and hungry, the men found refuge in an abandoned farmhouse outside the village of Callio. There, in flickering candlelight, Enzo Ricci whispered a warning: "In Italy, your friend today can be your executioner tomorrow." A few days later, their luck shifted when they encountered members of a local partisan group, the Garibaldi Brigade. These rugged fighters, a mix of escaped POWs, students, and farmers, had been waging guerrilla warfare against the Germans since 1943. They offered the Americans food, shelter, and a network of safe houses. In return, Mace's team shared intelligence about Allied advances in North Africa and plans for the future invasion of Italy's mainland. The bond between the OSS and the resistance would become one of the most vital and dangerous partnerships of the war. But the weight of their hidden objective, the search for the missing British officer, loomed large. As they mapped German troop movements and sabotaged railway lines along the Brenner Pass, whispers about the Englishman who vanished began to surface among the partisans. An old farmer in the hills claimed to have seen a man in a British uniform captured by the Germans months earlier. Another swore he'd heard Allied transmissions on a strange frequency coming from the direction of Lake Garda. Mace began to suspect their mission involved more than sabotage. It was about recovering something, or someone, the Allies desperately wanted kept secret. In his field diary, recovered years later, Mace wrote, "We were told to cut rail lines and cripple convoys, but every path leads back to one question: who was the Falcon, and why did he disappear?" As spring turned to summer, the team moved deeper into occupied territory, gathering intelligence and eluding capture. Each day brought new reports of German counterintelligence units sweeping the mountains, hunting for Allied infiltrators. The men could not radio home. They were ghosts in a land of shifting loyalties. By late June, the OSS in Algiers had lost all contact with Mace's team. Officially, Operation Chrysler continued. Unofficially, the Americans in the field were on their own, armed with courage, forged by secrecy, and haunted by a name that no one in Allied command dared to speak aloud. The last line of Mace's final entry in Chapter 1 captures both the spirit and the uncertainty of that time. We have crossed the line between war and shadow. Tomorrow we move toward Lake Garda. The Falcon is waiting, and with that, their trail vanished into the mist of northern Italy. At dawn on June 20th, 1943, Lieutenant John Mace's OSS team began the treacherous trek from the Brescia Valley toward Lake Garda, guided by partisan scouts who knew every ridge and ravine. The fog was thick, the air cold even in summer, and the men moved in silence, aware that German patrols from the 16th SS Panzergrenadier Division were sweeping the region after reports of Allied activity. Each footstep in the loose gravel felt like a gunshot. For the Americans, survival depended not only on stealth but on the trust of strangers who could turn them in at any moment. Their equipment was meager: one remaining Thompson submachine gun, 2 Colt .45 pistols, a small cache of TNT, and the remnants of their rations. The missing radio transmitter, lost during their chaotic landing, meant they could not report progress or call for extraction. "We are cut off," Mace wrote in his diary. "Our lifeline to the world above is silence." They were deep in enemy territory, tasked with finding intelligence that might no longer exist. 2 days later, the team reached the village of Bagolino, where Enzo Ricci made contact with a local priest known for aiding the resistance. Father Angelo Barisi, a stoic man with a weathered face, welcomed them into the stone rectory under the cover of night. He offered bread, wine, and information, rumors of German convoys using the mountain passes to move ammunition north to Austria. More intriguingly, he mentioned a story whispered by villagers. An English officer, wounded and delirious, had been hidden by monks months earlier before disappearing into the mountains. His codename, Barisi recalled, was Falco, the Italian word for falcon. For Mace, the pieces were aligning. The British officer, Captain Ellison, might have survived longer than the OSS believed. But if he had, why had no one heard from him since? Why had his signals ceased? And why were the Germans still searching the area with such intensity? The following week, Mace's team carried out their first act of sabotage. Under Keegan's direction, they planted explosives along a narrow bridge spanning the Cheese River, an important supply route for German fuel convoys heading to Verona. The operation went smoothly until a chance encounter with an Italian patrol loyal to Mussolini forced them to retreat through the forest under fire. Keegan was grazed by a bullet, and their partisan guide was captured. His screams echoed in the distance as the Germans interrogated him. The Americans could do nothing but run. That night, huddled in a hayloft outside Vestone, Mace wrote by candlelight, "Every face here is both ally and threat. Courage means trusting men whose names we may never learn. Trust, not gunfire, will win this war." It was a lesson the OSS had emphasized from the start. Espionage depended as much on faith as on skill. But faith was fragile in the shadow of occupation. Days later, their situation worsened. German counterintelligence, the feared Abwehr Section 4, had begun rounding up suspected partisans. Dozens were executed in nearby villages. The OSS team moved only at night, blending into the local population by day. Ricci bartered with farmers for food while Keegan fashioned crude explosives for mining supplies. Meanwhile, Willits, desperate to re-establish contact, scoured German radio frequencies for any signal resembling the old OSS cipher. Nothing, just static. Then, in early July, the mystery deepened. During a nighttime reconnaissance near a disused railway tunnel, Willits picked up a faint Morse transmission, 3 short bursts, followed by 2 long. It was the signature used by Allied intelligence networks to mark friendly contact. The frequency was old, outdated since early 1943, but was undeniably real. Could Ellison still be transmitting? Willits whispered. Mace didn't answer. The Falcon's last known call sign had used that same pattern. When they reported this to the Garibaldi partisans, their leader, a grizzled veteran named Pietro Zanetti, grew uneasy. He claimed others had heard similar transmissions months earlier, always originating from the same region, the cliffs above Lake Garda. But no one who went searching for the source ever returned. By mid-July, Mace's team faced starvation, exhaustion, and paranoia. The fog of war was no longer a metaphor. It was the literal mist that hid both enemy and ally. Ricci warned that German forces were closing in on resistance networks. The Americans knew it was only a matter of time before they were discovered. Still, Mace refused to abandon the mission. If Falcon is out there, he told his men, then he knows something worth dying for. And that means it's worth finding. In the final pages of his diary for that month, Mace wrote one haunting line: "We are shadows moving through a country of whispers. The falcon calls, and we follow into darkness." The next day, under cover of night, they began their climb toward Lake Garda, unaware that the signal they were chasing might not be a lifeline, but a trap. By the first week of August 1943, Lieutenant John Mace and his team had reached the high ridges overlooking Lake Garda. The journey had been grueling, weeks of moving under cover of night, crossing mined roads, and sleeping in barns or caves while eluding German patrols. The lake below shimmered under a pale moon, its stillness belying the chaos that surrounded it. Somewhere amid that calm, according to intercepted transmissions, lay the source of the mysterious Allied signal, calling itself Falcon. The OSS team established a temporary hideout near the hamlet of Toscolano Moderno, nestled between the lake and steep cliffs. The Garibaldi partisans they had befriended were reluctant to go further. Locals whispered of a German listening post in the mountains and of Allied prisoners seen briefly, then never again. For Mace, however, retreat was not an option. "We are closer to the truth than ever," he told Keegan, "and truth in wartime is a dangerous thing." Their daily reality was one of tension and scarcity. German convoys passed within sight of their shelter, and the sound of boots on cobblestones often signaled executions in the village square. The Americans rationed every crumb of bread and drop of fuel. Yet in that deprivation, they uncovered their first tangible lead. A local fisherman brought word of a downed aircraft discovered months earlier. A British Lysander reconnaissance plane crashed near Lim 1 Solgarda. The Germans had sealed off the site, but villagers remembered one survivor being taken away under heavy guard. His accent, they swore, was unmistakably English. That survivor could only have been Captain Robert Ellison, the man they now knew as Falcon. The next night, guided by the fishermen, Mace's team slipped into the restricted zone under cover of fog. The wreckage lay scattered among olive trees on a slope overlooking the lake. Most of the fuselage had been stripped for scrap, but Willits found fragments of a British radio set still embedded in the earth. The serial number matched the same series used by MI9, the British escape and evasion branch. They weren't dealing with a standard reconnaissance officer. Ellison had been part of a covert intelligence network that predated the OSS itself. As dawn approached, Ricci discovered a hidden compartment in a Rex-wing spar. Inside, a fragment of a coded message sheet partially burned but legible enough to reveal a phrase: "Contact secured. Awaiting retrieval, Falcon." The date? January 1943. It confirmed Ellison had survived his crash and made contact with someone after the fall. But who had he contacted? And why had the signal only resurfaced months later? Back at their hideout, the team debated what to do. Keegan argued they should exfiltrate and deliver their findings to Allied command. Ricci and Willits insisted on following the transmissions to their source, convinced that Ellison, or whoever was using his signal, was alive. Mace sided with them. "We came here to find a man," he said. "We leave only when we find the truth." That night, they set up their receiver and began sweeping the airwaves. Just past midnight, Willits froze. There it was again, 3 short bursts, too long, faint, but distinct. The signal originated from the northeast side of the lake, near the town of Malsacene. When he triangulated the source, the coordinates pointed to a German communications facility on the cliffs above, an Abwehr relay station. The revelation hit like a thunderclap. The Falcon signal wasn't an Allied distress call. It was coming from a German-controlled installation. Either Ellison had been captured and was sending forced transmissions, or someone was deliberately imitating his call sign to lure Allied operatives. The team decided to verify the source. Under darkness, they moved along the lakeshore, evading patrols and checkpoints. Their Italian guide, Pietro Zanetti, led them through an abandoned smuggling tunnel carved into the rock decades earlier. From there, they had a clear view of the German outpost, a small villa converted into a radio station guarded by a half-dozen soldiers. The flicker of antenna lights and the hum of generators filled the air. Willits confirmed the signal originated there. Mace stared through his binoculars and whispered, "If Falcon's alive, he's in there." They debated launching an attack but lacked the manpower or ammunition. Instead, they decided to infiltrate. Ricci, fluent in German, forged travel papers using capture documents. The plan was to pose as Axis supply workers and slip into the villa under pretense of delivering fuel canisters. It was daring and almost suicidal. Before setting out, Mace recorded one last entry in his field notebook. "The enemy's voice carries our friend's name. Either Falcon betrayed us, or he's warning us from the grave. Tomorrow, we find out which. That night, with rain pelting down and thunder rolling across the lake, the OSS team began their approach toward the villa. Behind them, the partisans watched in silence. Ahead lay the unknown, the heart of the mystery that had haunted Allied intelligence for nearly a year. And somewhere beyond the storm, the radio kept whispering the same signal through the static. 3 short bursts, too long. The storm over Lake Garda raged through the night as Lieutenant John Mace's OSS team approached the German communications villa near Malsacene. Rain lashed against their faces, masking their movement as they crept along the narrow cliffside road. Their forged documents were soaked, their uniforms a patchwork of captured Wehrmacht gear and partisan disguises. The thunder, for once, was an ally, each crash covering the clink of their weapons and the crunch of their boots. The plan was desperate but simple. Infiltrate the villa, locate the transmitter sending the Falcon signal, and uncover whether Captain Robert Ellison was alive or had become something far worse. Mace knew they had no backup, no extraction plan. The OSS in Algiers still believed Operation Chrysler was focused solely on sabotage. No one outside that rain-swept valley even knew where they were. By 0200 hours, they reached the perimeter fence. Keegan cut the wires silently, and the men slipped inside. Through a rain-streaked window, they saw 2 German operators hunched over radio equipment, one smoking, the other writing in a logbook. The interior was dimly lit by oil lamps. Power was intermittent due to Allied bombing of the local grid. Mace gave the hand signal, and within seconds they were inside. The takedown was swift. Ricci barked orders in fluent German, pretending to be aware reinforcements from Verona. The startled guards hesitated just long enough for Mace to knock one unconscious with the butt of his pistol. The other was subdued by Keegan, who tied him with comms wire. Willits immediately began scanning the transmitter frequencies, and there it was again, the Falcon signal, repeating in steady rhythm. But when he examined the equipment more closely, his face went pale. "This isn't British," he whispered. "It's ours, American make." The transmitter bore an OSS serial number. Somehow, US-manufactured radio gear had found its way into an Abwehr facility. Mace rifled through the desk drawers, uncovering a stack of files stamped Abwehr, Agent in Acton, Falcon. Inside were surveillance photos of Allied agents, coded message intercepts, and a brief dossier on a man whose face they recognized instantly, Captain Robert Ellison. According to the documents, Ellison had been captured alive in February and had agreed to work for German intelligence as part of a counter-espionage ruse against the Allies. Yet one phrase in the report stopped Mace cold. Operative retained for double-channel operation. Target OSS networks in Lombardy. If the file was true, Ellison hadn't been a victim. He'd been turned. Before they could process what this meant, headlights flashed outside. A convoy of German trucks was pulling up the drive. Through the rain, they could hear shouting. An inspection patrol had arrived earlier than expected. "We're out of time," Keegan hissed. Mace ordered Willits to grab what documents he could, while Ricci rigged a small explosive charge under the main transmitter. "We take what truth we can," Mace said, "and burn the rest." The team barely escaped through a rear window as German soldiers stormed the villa. Seconds later, the explosion shattered the night, lighting up the rain with a burst of orange flame. The blast destroyed the transmitter, but also alerted every garrison within miles. Sirens wailed down the lake as the OSS team fled uphill through the forest, gunfire echoing behind them. They regrouped hours later in a mountain hut used by partisans. Willits spread the captured documents across a wooden table, each page damp and smudged but still legible. Alongside the Abwehr files, he had recovered a single sheet of Allied stationery, typed and signed, but bearing the code header MI9 Liaison Rome. It referenced Operation Stallion, an intelligence sharing effort between British MI9 and the OSS, the same section where Ellison had served before his disappearance. The implication was staggering. Ellison might not have betrayed the Allies. He could have been part of a larger deception operation, a false defection designed to feed the Germans misinformation. If so, the OSS had never been informed, meaning Mace's entire mission might have been built on a lie. Ricci shook his head. "We risked everything to find a ghost," he said bitterly. "And the ghost might have been working for our own side." Mace didn't respond. He was staring at a final note scribbled in the margin of one document, written in English rather than German. "Deliver message to OSS contact. Falcon continues the game." The discovery split the team. Keegan wanted to destroy the files and make for Switzerland. Willits argued they needed to decode the message to understand what the game meant. Mace, ever the historian, believed the truth lay hidden in the contradiction. Either Ellison was a traitor, he said quietly, or he was the most brilliant operative of the war. At dawn, the partisans reported that German search teams were sweeping the hills. The OSS unit had to move again, deeper into the mountains above Lake Garda. They carried the rescue documents in a waterproof satchel, the only physical proof of their discovery. Below them, smoke rose from the ruins of the villa, where the Falcon signal had finally gone silent. As they hiked into the mist, Mace paused to record his thoughts. Truth, it seems, is no different from war. It changes sides when convenient. But the Falcon's trail isn't over. Not yet. In the distance, thunder rolled again, blending with the faint echo of German artillery. The men disappeared into the forest, unaware that the signal they had silenced would soon reappear from somewhere else entirely. By mid-August 1943, Lieutenant John Mace and his OSS team were deep in the mountains above Lake Garda, exhausted, hungry, and constantly on edge. The villa's destruction had temporarily halted the German pursuit, but intelligence indicated that aware counter-espionage units were now combing the region with renewed intensity. The mountains offered cover, but the team could not stay in one place for long, moving only at night and hiding by day in caves or abandoned shepherd huts. Their shelter that week was an isolated monastery perched on a cliff overlooking the lake. The monks were wary but offered limited refuge, providing food and a chance to rest. Mace used this time to review the documents recovered from the Abwehr villa. Among them were detailed reports of Allied operations, intercepted communications, and a small set of coded messages signed with the Falcon codename. Each document raised more questions than answers. Was Ellison alive and cooperating under duress, or was the German operation a sophisticated ruse to mislead Allied intelligence? The tension reached a breaking point when Willits detected another Morse signal late at night. The three short bursts, too long, identical to those they had chased from the beginning, came from a ridge directly above the monastery. The team was torn. Should they investigate, potentially walking into a trap, or stay hidden and wait? After long debate, Mace insisted, "We came to find Falcon. If he is alive, we follow his trail. If not, we find the truth behind the signal." Under cover of darkness, they ascended the ridge. The signal source turned out to be a small, concealed radio shack, cleverly camouflaged among the rocks. Inside, they found a solitary operator, his uniform unidentifiable, face obscured by shadow. The man handed Mace a single envelope and, without a word, disappeared into the night. Inside the envelope was a single-type message: "Falcon lives. Extraction impossible. Proceed with caution. Trust no one." No signature, no return address, only the chilling confirmation that Captain Ellison had survived, yet remained unreachable. This revelation forced a harsh reality upon the team. The missing British officer, long thought captured or killed, had become a phantom. All the planning, sabotage, and risk had led them to a man who existed only as a signal, a name, and a carefully orchestrated series of moves across enemy territory. The OSS unit realized that their mission had shifted from rescue to observation, intelligence gathering, and survival. The days following were some of the most perilous of their operation. German reconnaissance flights increased over the mountains, and local informants had been co-opted by Axis forces. Food and ammunition were running low. The men took extreme measures, rationing supplies, traveling only at night, and relying entirely on the goodwill and courage of partisan guides like Pietro Zanetti and Father Angelo Barisi. Despite the danger, the experience offered a grim insight. In his journal, Mace wrote, "The Falcon is a lesson. War is not measured only in territory gained or lives lost. Sometimes the most valuable victories are the secrets kept and the truths never spoken." For modern observers, this was a reminder that intelligence, trust, and patience often mattered more than force in the shadows of conflict. By late August, the team realized they could not continue indefinitely. Supplies were nearly gone, and the Germans were closing in faster than anticipated. Yet they decided to make one final transmission to Allied command, detailing the movement of German units, sabotage successes, and the confirmed existence of the Falcon signal. Mace knew that once transmitted, their identity as OSS operatives would be compromised, leaving them entirely on their own. The message was sent from the monastery's highest tower, the sound of Morse clicks echoing through the ancient stone corridors. Afterward, the men packed what little they could carry and prepared to disappear into the mountains once more. Willits and Keegan moved cautiously, aware that any misstep could lead to capture or death. Ricci led them along a hidden trail, known only to a few locals. As they vanished into the mist, Mace recorded one final thought for the chapter. We leave no footprints, only questions. The Falcon remains out there, untouchable, and perhaps that is how it must be. Some missions are never completed. They endure as shadows, shaping history quietly unseen. And so, the OSS agents of Operation Chrysler melted into the alpine terrain, leaving the monastery behind and taking with them a fragment of a truth that would remain unresolved for decades. Autumn of 1943 descended over northern Italy, painting the mountains in shades of gold and rust. But the OSS team remained unseen, moving through forests and abandoned villages. Lieutenant John Mace, Sergeant Keegan, Corporal Willits, and Enzo Ricci were ghosts, surviving on meager rations, partisan support, and sheer instinct. Every step brought the risk of German patrols, Axis informants, and the ever-present question, where was Captain Robert Ellison, the elusive Falcon? By October, Allied intelligence began piecing together reports from other sources. Declassified MI9 and OSS documents, released years later, revealed that Ellison had been captured after his Lysander crash but had agreed to a covert counterintelligence operation orchestrated jointly by MI9 and the OSS. His mission had been to feed disinformation to the Germans while maintaining the appearance of a turned agent. The Falcon transmissions, which Mace's team had chased through northern Italy, were part of a deliberate deception strategy, a game of shadows designed to mislead the enemy and protect future operations. The OSS team, however, had been unaware of this. To them, every Morse signal, every intercepted file, and every encounter had been a matter of life or death. Ellison's true allegiance remained a mystery to them, and likely for good reason. Intelligence officers had long learned that the fewer people who knew the whole truth, the safer the operation. Even today, some historians debate the details of Falcon's mission, with questions of loyalty and risk lingering like a fog over Lake Garda. The men finally made contact with a clandestine Allied extraction team in early November. They were smuggled across the mountains to Switzerland, carrying only fragments of their recovered intelligence. Many files had been destroyed to protect operational security. Their accounts were classified, their reports partially redacted, and Ellison himself disappeared once again into the shadows of wartime espionage. Some accounts suggest he continued working behind enemy lines in Italy under another alias. Others claim he returned to Britain, his service unacknowledged in public records. Mace reflected on their mission in a final OSS report. The Falcon taught us that some victories are invisible, some sacrifices unknown, and some truths must remain hidden. We fought not for recognition, but for the quiet triumph of strategy and survival. The legacy of Operation Chrysler endured in intelligence circles, influencing Allied counter-espionage operations throughout the war. Lessons from the mission, trusting local allies, moving silently, and understanding that information could be both weapon and bait, remain central to modern special operations training. And yet, for the ordinary observer, the mystery persists. Captain Ellison, the Falcon, may have been alive or gone. The transmissions they chased may have been authentic or carefully staged. The mountains of northern Italy, the villages that hid heroes and spies alike, still carry the echoes of a mission whose full story may never be known. The OSS agents who vanished into the alpine forests left behind only fragments, letters, diaries, and encrypted reports, reminding the world that in war, shadows often conceal the most vital truths. And in those shadows, the Falcon continues to fly.